Imagine you walk into work on Monday morning. Everyone is smiling. Your boss shakes your hand. Your coworkers ask about your weekend. Everything feels normal. Then, 3 days later, you discover something. A decision about your future was made weeks ago. Your position is changing, your responsibilities are being taken away, and the people around you already knew. You were the only one who didn't. No warning, no confrontation, no explanation. Just a decision that had already been made behind closed doors. And here's the part that should bother you most. The person who seemed the nicest throughout the entire process may have been the person controlling it. 500 years ago, an exiled government official tried to understand exactly this kind of world. His name was Niccolo Machiavelli. In 1513, he wrote a book that would become one of the most controversial works ever written about power, The Prince. And what makes this book so fascinating isn't that it teaches people to be cruel, it's that it asks a much more uncomfortable question. What if power doesn't actually work the way we're taught it should? What if looking trustworthy can be more valuable than actually being trustworthy? What if the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest one? The one quietly controlling what everyone else believes? 500 years later, kings have disappeared. Castles have become corporate offices. Armies have become organizations, and political courts have become boardrooms, campaigns at institutions. But the psychology of power? That part hasn't changed nearly as much as we think. To understand The Prince, you first have to understand the man who wrote it. Machiavelli wasn't sitting comfortably in a palace when he wrote the book. He had already fallen from power. For years, he worked as a diplomat and government official in Florence. He traveled. He negotiated with rulers. He witnessed wars. He watched alliances form, collapse. He saw men promise loyalty one day and betray each other the next. Machiavelli wasn't studying power from a distance. He was watching it happen up close. Then suddenly, everything changed. The government he served fell. The political order shifted. Machiavelli lost his position. He was arrested, interrogated, and tortured. Then he was sent into exile. Think about what that means. A man who had spent years studying governments suddenly had no government. A man who understood influence had none. And a man who'd spent his life around powerful people was now completely outside their world. So Machiavelli did something unusual. He wrote. During his exile, he began writing what would become The Prince.
And there was a personal reason behind it. He wanted powerful people to notice him again. He wanted to prove that he still understood politics, that he still had something to offer. In other words, even the book about power was partly written by a man trying to get back into the world of power. And that makes the book even more interesting, because Machiavelli wasn't asking, how should a perfect leader behave? He was asking, what does a leader actually have to do to survive? That question leads to his first and most famous principle. Rule number 1, better to be feared than loved. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." That sentence has survived for 500 years, and it's easy to misunderstand. At first glance, it sounds like Machiavelli is telling leaders to intimidate everyone around them, but that's not really the point. The deeper idea is about reliability. Love is emotional, and emotions change. Someone can love you when you're helping them. They can admire you when you're successful. They can support you when everything is going their way. But the moment the situation changes, so can their loyalty. Fear works differently. Fear is connected to consequences. If someone knows there is a real consequence for crossing a boundary, they're more likely to think twice before crossing it. Now bring that into modern life. Imagine 2 managers. The first manager wants everyone to like him. He says yes to everything. He avoids difficult conversations. When someone misses a deadline, he lets it slide. When someone behaves badly, he makes excuses. Everyone likes him. But eventually something happens. People stop taking him seriously because everyone knows there are no real consequences. Now imagine the second manager. He's not cruel, he doesn't scream, he doesn't insult people, he doesn't threaten anyone, but his expectations are clear. If you make a commitment, you keep it. If you make a mistake, you own it. If you cross a boundary, there is a consequence. People may not love him, but they know where he stands. And that's the difference. Fear doesn't always mean terror.
Sometimes fear simply means this person has boundaries, and those boundaries are real. And this is where Machiavelli becomes useful in your own life, because sometimes someone isn't trying to scare you directly. They're teaching you to scare yourself. Maybe your boss never says, "Don't disagree with me." Instead, the last person who disagreed with him suddenly stopped getting important projects. Maybe a coworker never threatens you, but every time you challenge them, they make sure you regret it. Eventually, nobody has to tell you what to do. You already know. You start watching your words. You start changing your decisions. You start avoiding certain subjects. And that's when something important has happened. The control has moved inside your head. The most powerful form of control isn't when someone gives you an order. It's when you start giving yourself the... And that brings us to Machiavelli's next idea. Because fear isn't the only weapon in the game. Sometimes, the smarter move is not to attack at all. Rule number 2. The fox and the lion. Machiavelli believed a ruler needed to understand two animals, the lion and the fox. The lion represents strength, the fox represents cunning. And his point was simple. If you're only a lion, you can be trapped. If you're only a fox, you can be crushed. You need to understand both. Think about a negotiation. One person sits across the table and says, "This is my final offer." No explanation, no flexibility, just pressure. That's the lion. But the other person doesn't fight back. They listen. They ask questions. They collect information. Then they leave. A week later, they return, and suddenly they know something the other side didn't realize they knew. Now the entire negotiation has changed. No threats, no shouting, no confrontation, just information, timing, and patience. That's the fox. And this is something you'll see everywhere, in business, in politics, in negotiations, even in everyday relationships. Some people dominate conversations. Others control the conversation without appearing to control it. Some people tell you exactly what they want. Others make you believe that their idea was your idea. Some people use pressure. Others use uncertainty. And the important thing isn't to become one of them. The important thing is to recognize what you're looking at. When someone pushes aggressively, ask, "Is this the lion?" When someone is being unusually careful with information, ask, "Is this the fox?" When someone keeps changing the situation without directly confronting you, pay attention, because sometimes the person making the most noise isn't the person with the most power. And sometimes the quietest person in the room already knows how the conversation is going to end. But there's another problem with power. Even if you have strength and if you have strategy, you still need something else. You need people to believe a certain story about you. And that's where Machiavelli's third principle becomes incredibly relevant to the modern world. Rule number 3. Appearances can be more powerful than reality. Machiavelli understood something that modern politicians, executives, and influencers understand very well. People don't experience reality directly. They experience what they can see. They see confidence. They see clothing. They hear words, they watch body language, they notice reputation, and then they build a story. This is what we now call optics. A company announces, "We care deeply about our employees." The website looks perfect. The executives give speeches about culture. The social media posts look inspiring. But inside the company, employees may be experiencing something completely different. The image is one thing, the reality is another. And Machiavelli understood that the image itself has power. Think about someone you meet for the first time. They're confident, they're articulate, they're calm. They know exactly what to say. You immediately assume they're competent. But stop for a second. What evidence do you actually have? Maybe they're competent, maybe they're simply very good at looking competent. Those are two completely different things. And this happens constantly. A politician looks compassionate on camera. The CEO talks about integrity. A manager talks about teamwork. A person tells you they're loyal. But what happens when nobody's watching? That's the real test. Because anyone can perform goodness when there's something to gain from looking good. The more revealing question is, what do they do when there's nothing to gain? How do they treat people beneath them? They behave under pressure. How do they react when someone says no? How do they talk about people who can no longer help them? And do their actions consistently match their words? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A reputation can be carefully constructed. A person can spend years building an image while quietly behaving in a completely different way. And once you understand that,
You stop asking only, does this person seem trustworthy? You start asking, what evidence do I have? That one question can protect you from an enormous amount of manipulation. But Machiavelli had one more principle, and this one is considerably darker. Machiavelli wrote about something that sounds disturbing today: the difference between actions that are decisive and suffering that is prolonged. His argument was that when a difficult action had to be taken, spreading the pain out over time could create more instability than dealing with a situation decisively. We're not endorsing cruelty. We're examining the psychology behind it. And there's a modern version of this that almost everyone has experienced: uncertain. Imagine your company announces, we may be making some changes. That's all they tell you. No details, no timeline, no explanation. Now you go home, you start thinking, am I getting fired? Is my team being cut? Should I start looking for another job? The next morning, you hear another rumor.
then another. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. The company hasn't actually done anything to you, but psychologically, you're already suffering because uncertainty creates a special kind of fear. Your mind fills in the blanks, and your imagination usually chooses the worst possible answer. That's why sometimes waiting for bad news feels worse than receiving bad news. The same thing happens in negotiations. Someone keeps saying, maybe, we'll see. I'm still thinking about it. I'll let you know. They haven't technically said no, but they haven't said yes either. And now you're trapped. You're waiting. You're analyzing every message, every silence, every change in tone. The person hasn't even made a decision, yet they already have psychological control over your attention. That's why clarity is powerful. Even bad news can be easier to handle when it's clear, because once you know the reality, you can respond to it, you can make a decision, you can move. But uncertainty keeps you waiting, and sometimes the waiting is the weapon. Now, we need to make one thing very clear, because this is where people often misunderstand Machiavelli. Reading The Prince doesn't mean you should become ruthless. It doesn't mean you should manipulate people. It doesn't mean fear is better than kindness. And it certainly doesn't mean morality doesn't matter. Machiavelli was largely describing the mechanics of power. He was saying, this is what people sometimes do when power is at stake. That's very different from saying, this is what you should do. Think about a doctor studying a disease. Understanding how a disease spreads doesn't mean the doctor wants people to get sick. The same principle applies here. Understanding manipulation doesn't mean becoming a manipulator. Understanding intimidation doesn't mean becoming intimidating. Understanding political games doesn't mean playing dirty. It means you can recognize what's happening around you, because there's a huge difference between being naive and being kind. A kind person can still have boundaries. A peaceful person can still recognize manipulation. A trustworthy person can still understand deception. And perhaps that's the most useful way to read Machiavelli, not as a manual for becoming ruthless, but as a guide to recognizing ruthlessness. Knowledge is not permission. So, what can you actually take from all of this? 4 things. First, build boundaries. You don't need everyone to like you. Being liked and being respected are not the same thing. Second, watch patterns. Don't judge someone by one impressive conversation. Watch what they repeatedly do. Third, separate optics from reality. Ask, what am I being shown? And then ask, what is actually happening? Those 2 answers aren't always the same. And fourth, pay attention to fear. If someone constantly makes you afraid of consequences, stop and ask, who benefits from me being afraid? That question alone can change the way you see a situation, because once you can identify the strategy, you become much harder to control with it. Maybe Machiavelli's greatest legacy isn't that he taught powerful people how to become ruthless. Maybe it's that he taught ordinary people what ruthlessness looks like. He showed us that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It doesn't always threaten you. Sometimes it simply changes your options. It doesn't always lie. Sometimes it tells you exactly what you want to hear, and it doesn't always attack you. Sometimes it makes you question yourself. That's why you shouldn't walk away from The Prince thinking, I need to become more ruthless. Walk away thinking,
I need to become harder to manipulate. Watch the patterns. Question the image. Understand the incentives. Pay attention to consequences. And never confuse someone's performance with their character. Because 500 years ago, Machiavelli put the game of power onto paper. Today, that game is still being played. In boardrooms, in politics, in negotiations, in relationships, and sometimes right in front of you. The question isn't whether Machiavelli's ideas survived. They did. The real question is, when someone starts playing the game with you, will you recognize it before it's too late?